Good evening, everybody. We're going to continue our look at Samson in the book of Judges this evening. So if you have your Bible, please open to Judges 14. Like I said, in previous lessons, anytime you can pause this and go look at the scriptures and then bring it back. Well, last week we looked at Judges 13, which was Samson's origin story. And today we're going to skip through time several years, though we don't know exactly how many years. Last week we had the birth of Samson announced by an angel of the Lord, maybe the angel of the Lord, to his parents. And it gives us a very brief description of Samson's life in verse 24 of chapter 13. It just says that the boy grew, or the young man grew, depending on what translation you have. The Lord blessed him, and the Spirit of the Lord began to stir in him at Mahanadan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. Now, so we've skipped from Samson's announcement of his birth to him being a young man, and here we are as he is younger. It says in verse 1 of chapter 14, Samson went down to Timnah, and at Timnah he saw one of the daughters of the Philistines. I remember the Philistines are one of the main antagonists of Israel. We don't see them too often until about this time. We do run into them on occasion, however, and then they will be the main antagonists of the Israelites, at least through David's reign. They will still be around, but they will lessen and decline after the reign of David. But they are Canaanites, and they are idolatrous. And so the reader will already understand that this is going to be a problem, because you go back to the law of Moses. We understand that the Israelites were not to marry anyone outside of Israel, lest they lead the Israelites away from God. And we see this as a constant battle with Israel. That even after the exile, we see Ezra dealing with the unfaithfulness of those that have returned from Babylon/Persia. They've gone back home, and now they're marrying people who are not Israelites, and already leading people away, and they put an end to that very quickly. But anyway, that's for a different discussion. Samson is in trouble here. His father and his mother said to him in verse 3, "Is there not a woman among the daughters of your relatives or among all your people that you must go to take a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" But Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she is right in my eyes." So we're beginning to see some flaws in Samson's character. When he says she is right in my eyes, that deals a little bit with lust, and that he lusts for this girl, and he is doing things that he ought not do. But at the same time, what the reader will come to understand, if they have not done so already by studying Samson many times, is that God is going to use Samson's weaknesses, and he's going to take advantage of the enemies of Samson, the enemies of Israel, by the weaknesses and the character flaws that we find in Samson. Now, this is vital that we understand this coming up. Samson was not a horrible, horrible person, but at the same time, he wasn't a great person either, and we don't see that. We don't see that in any of the judges. Maybe more in Samson. He's a great leader. He does what needs to be done. He does have faith in God. We should never think that he doesn't have faith in God. He has a great deal of faith, but he also struggles with his flaws. And in many ways, we can all hopefully relate to that. We don't want our flaws, but they are there nonetheless. And oftentimes God will work in spite of the flaws that we have, and we see him doing that with Samson. But I said that to say this. A lot of times we look at people in the Bible and we think, well, they were put in the Bible, and we almost give them divine status of some sort, and that is an unfortunate thing, because none of them deserve that place except for Jesus, who actually was divine. The Bible is not giving us all of these stories so that we can see who we want to be like, except for Jesus. He's the one that we're supposed to aim for. It never once, just because someone's in the Bible doesn't mean that God is somehow justifying their flaws and their wrong deeds because he's working through them and in spite of them. We must keep in context that the main character of the Bible is God. And so when we start focusing more on God, that he is working in and through individuals despite their flaws, and sometimes through their flaws, then that's supposed to give us a greater faith in who God is and what he's able to do, when that gives us a better understanding of Romans chapter 8, verse 28. All things work together for good to them that love God, to them that are called according to his purpose. That doesn't mean that we should go around, as Paul would say in Romans 6, sin all the more, that grace may abound, may it never be. But it does mean that God is going to get his will accomplished with or without us, through us or in spite of us. And so that's where we see with Samson. Samson does have some qualities that all of us should aspire to, and he has some qualities that all of us should shun. And I think those are pretty painfully obvious as we go through these next several chapters. Now, as verse 4 echoes what we've been talking about, he says, his father and his mother did not know that it was from the Lord, for he was seeking an opportunity against the Philistines. At that time, the Philistines ruled over Israel. So then in verse 5 it says, Samson went down with his father and mother to Timnah, and they came to the vineyards of Timnah, and behold, a young lion came toward him roaring. Then the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him, and although he had nothing in his hand, he tore the lion in pieces, as one tears a young goat. But he did not tell his father or his mother what he had done. Then he went down and talked with the woman, and she was right in Samson's eyes. So you have that phrase again, is right in his eyes. Now, this story about the lion is going to serve two purposes. Number one, it sets up a story and an important event in Samson's life that is to come here in just a little bit. Number two, and perhaps primarily, it is displaying the strength that Samson had. Lions are one of the most powerful creatures currently on earth, and has been this way for, at least on land, for quite some time. There is a very interesting documentary called African Cats that deals with lions. If you've not watched that, I encourage you to do so, to see just how powerful these creatures that God has created actually are, and how strong they are. You've seen them on National Geographic and in pictures, and if you've gone to the zoo or the circus, maybe you've seen the strength of a lion. Lions are pretty much just relegated now. Their population has shrunk a great deal, all the way to just the areas in Africa. But there was a time that lions were actually all over the earth. I don't know exactly where they weren't, but we know that they were. Their population was very, very wide. And so here we are in Israel, although Israel is pretty close to Africa. But it was not unheard of to have lions in Israel at that time. And so this lion ambushes Samson, but Samson catches him by the beard, or the mane as we would call it, and defeats the lion, which is to show us how strong Samson is. Now, the thing is Samson always that strong? A lot of pictures that we see of Samson, he looks like what you would expect Hercules to look like, or if you remember the toys from the 80s, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, we always expect Samson to have great big muscles. And he may have, but they weren't really needed because Samson got his strength from God. And it was a supernatural strength. So he could have been a scrawny little dude and still would have had that great strength because it was from the Lord. And the Lord was working in him and through his body, giving him that great strength. So he kills the lion, doesn't tell his parents what he did, and then he goes back down to Timnah and he sees the girl. It says in verse 8, after some days he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass. And here's where it gets interesting and some subtleties that we need to catch. He's to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees in the body of the lion and honey. He scraped it out into his hands and went on eating as he went. He came to his father and mother and gave some to them, and they ate, but he did not tell them that he had scraped the honey from the carcass of the lion. All right. I happen to enjoy honey quite a bit. I just open up the little honey bottle, especially when it's local, for all the health benefits, but I love the taste of it as well. I'll just open up the jar and turn it upside down and just squirt it in my mouth, and I'll be happy. Hope thinks I'm disgusting, but Nathan does it with me now too. However, the honey that we eat is, pasteurized, taken care of, not coming out of a dead animal. This obviously is some time. It says after some days. We don't know how many days has passed, but it's after some time that Samson has already killed the lion, and he returns. The lion's body's still there. They didn't have people coming up and picking up dead animals like we should have in our world today. And bees decided that would be a good place to build a nest and have some honey. Now here is where it gets interesting, and here's the subtlety that we need to catch, because later on, Samson's going to get his hair cut, and he's going to lose his strength, and everyone's like, oh, Samson's strength, laying his hair, and all of this. First of all, that's not entirely so. There's a reason that he says that my strength lays in my hair. And it goes back to this. Samson was a Nazirite from birth. We remember that. And if you go back to the old law, we see what a Nazirite was supposed to do. Now, most of the time Nazirites, people who took the Nazirite vow, the Naziritic vow, they would not take it for a very long period of time. While they were under the Naziritic vow, the Nazirite vow, there were 3 stipulations on them. I think we talked about this a little bit last week, but we'll review it again. One stipulation was that you were not to drink or eat from the fruit of the vine. So no wine, no grapes, nothing like that. Number 2, you were not allowed to touch anything dead. While you're under the vow, you're not allowed to touch anything dead. And number 3, you're not allowed to get your hair cut. Your hair had to grow for however long you're under the vow. Interesting enough, there's only 3 instances that we see the Nazirite vow in play. Only one for sure, but it does seem like there's 2 other ones that are pretty sure about that. Samson's the one sure one. Samuel, in the book of 1 Samuel, may be as well. It seems that he is. And then the 3rd one is John the Baptist. But we're not entirely sure about those last 2. Samson definitely is. There is a possibility that Paul took the Nazirite vow for a little while in the book of Acts. There does seem to be an implication that he did. I don't know that 100% though. So Samson breaks one of the rules. And he's a Nazirite for life. And if Samuel was, so was he. And if John was, so was he. So the only ones that we see for sure, Samson is one for life, a Nazirite for life. Maybe the other 2 are as well. If they're Nazirites, they definitely are. Paul, if he took it, he was only doing it for a small time. But one thing that they're not supposed to do is touch a dead animal. Samson not only touches a dead animal, he gets food out of a dead animal. Why didn't he want to tell his parents? Because he knew what their reaction would be, is the implication. He's a Nazirite. They are safe. They are guarding over him, watching him. They know what the angel had told them to do as they raised him. And we have Samson, who's kind of rebelling against that. He doesn't want to tell his mom and dad what happened, where he got the honey, because he knew that they would not be happy at all, and there would be serious repercussions. Now, it says in verse 10, his father went down to the woman, and Samson prepared a feast there, for so the young men used to do. Before we move on, we will come back to the lion later on when Samson loses his strength, and put it all together, if I don't forget, that is. As soon as the people in verse 11 saw him, they brought 30 companions to be with him. And Samson said to them, "Let me now put a riddle to you. If you can tell me what it is within the 7 days of the feast and find it out, then I will give you 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes. But if you cannot tell me what it is, then you shall give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothes." And they said to him, Put your riddle, that we may hear it." And he said, "Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet." Obviously, that's a pretty tough riddle, and they don't have a clue as to what he's talking about. So they're sweating. They're sweating about this. If we don't get this, not only are they going to be shamed by an Israelite, who, because he was one that they had conquered, they're going to look like fools. So their pride's going to be hurt, and they don't want to give Samson that many clothes. So they don't want to put out the cash for that. So they can't figure it out. On the 4th day, it says in verse 15, they come to Samson's wife, "Entice your husband to tell us what the riddle is, lest we burn you and your father's house with fire. Have you invited us here to impoverish us?" And Samson's wife wept over him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have put a riddle to my people, and you have not told me what it is." He said to her, "Behold, I have not told my father, nor my mother. Shall I tell you?" Okay, so there may be a second reason that Samson hasn't told his mom and dad about what's going on. He wants to keep them in the dark, wants to keep everybody in the dark, a secret that only he himself has, so that he can also mess with the Philistines. It says in verse 17, she wept before him the 7 days that their feast lasted, and on the 7th day he told her, because she pressed him hard. Then she told the riddle to her people, and the men of the city said to him on the 7th day before the sun went down, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Now, Samson knew what they had done, and so he says, "If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have found out my riddle." Okay. It does seem very cruel that he calls his wife a heifer here. Probably does not have the same connotation that we would have in our world today, but it is still, you still see the frustration that's in Samson because of what had happened and how they had gone about and how they had cheated. So it says in verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. See, there's where his great strength lies. We've seen it already. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. He went down to Ashkelon and struck down 30 men of the town and took their spoil and gave the garments to those who had told the riddle. In hot anger, he went back to his father's house, and Samson's wife was given to his companion, who had been his best man. There's lots of things going on there. Samson, again, this does not mean that God was justifying Samson's character flaws, but there is a war about to go on. No one else is fighting the Philistines. God is wanting to deliver his people, and so Samson is the one that he's chosen to use, and he's getting his will done in spite of Samson's flaws. And he goes and he kills these men, and he brings back the clothing. And then he's angry. It's been a week. He married his wife a week earlier. They had their festival. Samson is humiliated in front of these men who were his enemies by his wife, because she is afraid of what is going to happen. They've already threatened her. This is just not a good situation to be in any way that you shape. You can't really judge one person over the other. And so Samson goes back home, and that last line that she was given to his companion, who had been his best man, is how we're going to see the next thing that happens. Samson is driven to attack once again, and we will cover that next week. But what we see is God uses Samson here, and we've talked about that already. I don't want to belabor the point, but God is getting His will accomplished, and God can get His will accomplished in any way that He wants to. And as we read through the Scriptures, we should be astounded in the ways that God gets things done. And that is also the way with Samson. Not just the miracles, but the logic and the strategy, and the sheer will that nothing is able to ever overcome. And the same is true today. We're not Samson. God's not going to rush upon us and give us great strength. But that same Spirit that rushed upon Samson to give him his strength is the same Spirit that we have been promised as Christians to help us overcome our sin through our faith and our obedience to Christ, and the grace that has been bestowed upon us, and God is working on us through the Word by the Holy Spirit that inspired it. He dwells within us, and there's so much more that we could say, but we can see certainly that that God was with Samson just as God is with us today. I want to thank everybody for listening, and I hope that you will have a good week. Hope that you enjoy listening to lessons about Samson. He's a very interesting study. We will talk to you all later. God bless and goodbye.